You know that feeling when you think you've got someone wrapped around your finger? That was me and Jacob at work. I'm Maria, 35, and honestly, I'd gotten pretty comfortable with our little dynamic. He was this funny, charming guy who'd started about 8 months before me, and we just clicked. Not in a romantic way. I mean, we both knew better than that workplace drama bullshit, but there was definitely this energy between us. We'd text after hours about work stuff, sometimes random things. He'd always swing by my desk with coffee, make these little inside jokes that had me cracking up. The other girls in the office would roll their eyes when we'd get going, but whatever. They were probably just jealous that they didn't have someone making their day more interesting. I got used to being the one he'd seek out for lunch, the one he'd vent to about difficult clients. It felt good, you know? Like I was special. I wasn't trying to steal anyone's man or anything dramatic like that, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy the attention. Who doesn't want to feel wanted? And Jacob made me feel like the most interesting person in that boring office. I started looking forward to Mondays just because I knew he'd be there with some story about his weekend, asking about mine. It was harmless flirting, the kind that makes work actually bearable instead of soul-crushing. Between us, I kind of loved how the other women would watch us interact. There was this one bitch, Kelly, who worked in our department and would always make these little comments about how close Jacob and I were getting. Like she was concerned or something. Please. She was just mad that nobody paid attention to her boring personality. I'd catch her staring when Jacob would lean over my desk to look at something on my computer, standing just close enough that I could smell his cologne. Those moments felt electric, like we had this secret understanding that nobody else got. The texting thing started innocently enough. He'd send me funny memes about our boss, or complain about some difficult client. Then it evolved into more personal stuff, what we were watching on Netflix, random thoughts about life. Nothing inappropriate, but definitely more than just work colleagues. I'd find myself checking my phone constantly, getting this little thrill every time his name popped up. Sometimes we'd text until late at night, just random conversation that felt so easy and natural. I convinced myself it was just friendship. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was an intimacy to it that made me feel special, chosen. Jacob had this way of making me feel like the smartest person in the room. When I'd suggest something in meetings, he'd immediately jump on it, building off my ideas in ways that made them sound even better. He'd reference our previous conversations, little inside jokes that showed he was actually listening to me. Other guys at work would zone out when I talked, but Jacob hung on every word. He made me feel witty and interesting in a way I hadn't felt in years. I started putting more effort into how I looked at work, choosing outfits I knew he'd notice, wearing the perfume he'd complimented once. The whole thing felt perfectly balanced, if I'm being honest. I got the emotional connection and attention I craved, without any of the messy complications of an actual relationship. Jacob got someone who understood his work stress, laughed at his jokes, made his days more enjoyable. It was like having all the good parts of a relationship without any of the bullshit. I thought we had this perfect little arrangement that could go on indefinitely. We were both getting what we needed from each other, and nobody was getting hurt. At least, that's what I told myself. Our routine became sacred to me. Jacob would arrive with 2 coffees every Tuesday and Thursday. Mine with extra cream, no sugar, exactly how I liked it. We'd spend the first 15 minutes of the day catching up, sometimes stretching it to 20 if our boss wasn't around yet. He'd tell me about whatever podcast he was listening to, or some documentary that kept him up too late. I'd share my weekend plans, or complain about my roommate's latest drama. It felt natural, comfortable, like we'd been doing this for years instead of months. I loved how he'd seek me out specifically when something interesting happened. If we landed a big client, Jacob would text me before anyone else. When our boss said something particularly ridiculous in a meeting, we'd exchange looks across the conference table, sharing this silent moment of amusement. He made me feel like his confidant, the person he trusted most in that place. And honestly, that feeling was addictive. I'd never had someone pay attention to me the way Jacob did. never felt so important to someone's daily happiness. The other women in the office definitely noticed our connection. Some of them seemed envious, like Sarah from reception, who'd always find excuses to walk past Jacob's desk when she knew we were talking. Others, like that bitch Kelly, acted concerned about appropriate workplace relationships. But none of them understood what we had. It wasn't some cheap office romance or sexual tension thing. It was deeper than that. A real friendship with someone who actually got me, who appreciated my sense of humor and made me feel valued. Then Diane showed up, and everything changed. 42 years old, which honestly surprised me because she carried herself like someone much older. She had all this experience that made our boss practically worship the ground she walked on from day one. I could tell immediately that she was one of those women who thinks she's hot shit because she's been around longer than everyone else. She had this confident way of talking that rubbed me completely wrong, like she knew secrets the rest of us didn't. And Jacob? He was immediately fascinated. I watched him introduce himself to her that first day, and something in his whole demeanor shifted. Suddenly, he was standing straighter, using his professional voice instead of the relaxed way he talked to me. His whole body language changed when she was around, more formal, more eager to impress. It was like watching him put on a performance, and it made my stomach turn. This wasn't the Jacob I knew. The one who'd spend 20 minutes debating whether our boss was having a midlife crisis or just losing his mind. I tried to brush it off at first. New person, everyone's always extra polite initially. But then it kept happening, day after day. He'd find reasons to walk past her desk, offer to help her with systems she probably knew better than him. When I'd try to catch his eye during meetings, he'd be focused on whatever boring thing she was saying. I started noticing how he'd light up when she'd contribute to conversations. Like her opinions mattered more than everyone else's combined. It was subtle, initially, but I could feel the shift happening. Our easy chemistry was getting interrupted by his sudden desperate need to impress her. And the worst part? She acted like she didn't even notice his attention. Just did her work with this calm, unbothered energy that somehow made her more appealing to him. I'd watch her in meetings contributing these straightforward ideas that weren't even that brilliant, but Jacob would nod like she was dropping profound wisdom. She had this annoying habit of asking really basic questions that showed she was still learning our systems, but somehow Jacob found that endearing instead of irritating. Like her cluelessness was charming or something equally ridiculous. The first real sign that things were changing came during our weekly team meeting. Jacob and I usually sat next to each other, a routine we'd fallen into months ago without even discussing it. But that day, he chose a seat next to Diane instead. When I tried to join the conversation they were having before the meeting started, I got these polite but distant responses that made it clear I wasn't welcome in their little chat. It felt like being excluded from the cool kids' table in high school all over again. Except worse because I thought Jacob and I were past all that petty social hierarchy bullshit. I spent the entire meeting watching their interaction, seeing how animated Jacob became when talking to her, how differently he carried himself around her. He'd lean in when she spoke, like her words were the most important things he'd ever heard. When she made suggestions, he'd immediately build on them, adding details and enthusiasm that made her basic ideas sound revolutionary. Meanwhile, when I contributed to the discussion, he barely acknowledged me. It was like I'd become invisible, like our months of friendship and connection meant absolutely nothing. After that meeting, I tried to corner Jacob for our usual post-meeting debrief, something we'd done religiously for months. We'd dissect every stupid thing our boss said, make jokes about the pointless agenda items, bond over the shared experience of workplace absurdity. But he brushed me off with some excuse about needing to get back to work immediately. This was the guy who used to spend 30 minutes analyzing our boss's word choices, and now he was too busy? I knew exactly where his attention had gone, and it wasn't toward being more productive. Within 2 weeks, Jacob basically stopped existing in my world. Our morning coffee runs, gone without explanation. The after-work texts about random stuff, complete radio silence. I'd say, "Hey, Jacob," when I passed his desk, and he'd give me this weird stiff nod like we were strangers who'd maybe been introduced once at a company party. It was fucking bizarre and hurtful. I mean, we'd been tight for months, sharing inside jokes and personal stories, and suddenly I was invisible? I started paying closer attention to where his attention was going, and surprise, surprise, it was all focused on Diane. He'd hover around her workspace, asking if she needed anything, offering to explain systems she was perfectly capable of figuring out herself. He'd save seats for her in meetings, make sure she had the good pens during brainstorming sessions, rush to help her carry anything heavier than a stapler. When she'd make suggestions, he'd jump all over them like she was some kind of genius, building elaborate plans around her most basic observations. Meanwhile, when I'd try to join their conversations, I'd get these polite but distant responses that made it clear I wasn't welcome. The whole thing felt personal and deliberate, like he was deliberately cutting me out of his life. I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong. Had I said something inappropriate? Been too friendly? Not friendly enough? I started overthinking every interaction we'd had, wondering if I'd somehow crossed a line I didn't know existed. But the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that this wasn't about me at all. This was about him being completely pussy-whipped by some older woman who probably reminded him of his mother or something equally gross and psychological. I mean, what 42-year-old woman doesn't have major baggage? Divorce history, kids with behavioral problems, trust issues from past relationships, the whole 9 yards of middle-aged female drama. And why was he so eager to take all that on? It made no sense to me. We had this perfect thing going, this easy connection that made work actually enjoyable, and he was throwing it away for what? Someone who'd probably been through multiple failed relationships and had more red flags than a communist parade? The texting stopped completely, which honestly hurt more than I wanted to admit to myself. I'd gotten used to that constant connection, that feeling of being important to someone throughout the day. Now my phone felt dead, and I'd catch myself checking it constantly out of habit, hoping to see his name pop up. Sometimes I'd start to type out a message to Jacob, something funny that happened or a complaint about work, before remembering that we weren't doing that anymore. The silence felt deliberate and cruel, like he was punishing me for something I couldn't even identify. I started noticing how Jacob would position himself in meetings to have the best view of Diane, how he'd time his breaks to coincide with hers. It was like watching someone become a completely different person, and not in a good way. The confident, funny guy I'd connected with had turned into this eager puppy dog, desperate for any scrap of attention from her. It was embarrassing to watch, honestly. Did he have no pride at all? No sense of how pathetic he looked, following her around like some lovesick teenager? Since Jacob wanted to play games, I decided I could play too. I started being extra friendly with the other guys in the office, Tyler from our sister department, Brendan from management, even our boss when the situation was appropriate. Nothing inappropriate or unprofessional, just the same energy and attention I'd been giving Jacob. Suddenly, he was paying attention to me again. But not in a good way. He'd get this tight expression on his face when he'd see me laughing with other men. During team meetings, if I was talking to one of the guys, Jacob would interrupt with work questions or find ways to pull them away from our conversation. The fake concern was so transparent it was almost funny. Like, you can't have me, but you don't want anyone else to either? The double standard was absolutely infuriating. He gets to fawn all over Diane like some teenage boy with his first crush. But the second I give attention to other people, suddenly he's territorial and possessive. I wasn't even doing anything wrong, just being friendly and professional with my colleagues. But somehow that was threatening to him in a way that his obvious pursuit of Diane apparently wasn't. I started making little comments too, nothing mean or unprofessional, just observations that anyone with eyes could see. "Oh wow, Diane, that's such an interesting perspective," in a tone that made it clear I thought her suggestion was pretty basic. Or, "Jacob, you're so helpful today," when he'd rush to assist her with something she could easily handle herself. I wasn't being a bitch, just pointing out the obvious dynamics that everyone could see, but nobody wanted to acknowledge. But somehow I became the problem in this situation. People started giving me looks like I was the one being weird and inappropriate, when really, I was just responding to his bizarre behavior. It's not my fault he couldn't handle a little competition, or that he'd thrown away a good friendship for some middle-aged fantasy. And honestly, the other guys were more fun anyway. At least they appreciated my sense of humor, instead of acting like I was bothering them by existing in the same office space. Tyler, especially, seemed to enjoy our conversations. He had this dry wit that reminded me of what Jacob used to be like, before he became obsessed with impressing Diane. We'd exchange looks during particularly boring meetings, make little jokes that nobody else caught on to. I could tell it bothered Jacob, the way Tyler and I would crack up at something stupid our boss said, or how Tyler would stop by my desk just to chat about random things. Good. Maybe a little jealousy would remind him what he'd given up and thrown away, but Jacob's reaction wasn't what I'd expected or hoped for. Instead of realizing his mistake and trying to rebuild our friendship, he doubled down on his pursuit of Diane. It was like he was deliberately trying to prove that he'd moved on completely, that I meant absolutely nothing to him anymore. He'd make a point of walking past my desk with Diane, talking loudly about plans they were making or inside jokes they'd apparently developed. The whole performance was so obvious and petty that I almost felt sorry for him. The breaking point came when I overheard Jacob telling Diane about some restaurant he wanted to try, asking if she'd like to go with him sometime. This conversation happened literally 2 feet from my desk, clearly meant for me to hear every word. The suggestion was casual enough to maintain plausible deniability, just colleagues trying a new place together. But the intention was obvious to anyone paying attention. I'd mentioned that same restaurant to Jacob weeks ago, said we should check it out together sometime when we were planning potential lunch spots. Now he was taking her instead, and making sure I knew about it. Everything came to a head during our quarterly review meeting. Diane was presenting some process improvement idea that was honestly pretty standard stuff, nothing particularly revolutionary or innovative. But Jacob was sitting there nodding like she was presenting the cure for cancer, taking detailed notes on every single word she said. When it was my turn to present my project updates, he was checking his phone and barely paying attention, not even trying to hide his disinterest or maintain basic professional courtesy. That's when I finally snapped. I made some comment about how some people seem more interested in certain presentations than others, and the whole room went silent. Diane just looked at me with this calm, almost pitying expression that made my blood absolutely boil. Jacob's face turned red, and our boss cleared his throat like I'd committed some major social crime by pointing out the obvious. After the meeting, Patterson pulled me aside and basically told me my attitude was becoming disruptive to the team dynamic. Apparently, multiple people had complained about my negativity and unprofessional behavior. Which was complete bullshit, because all I'd done was react normally to being treated like garbage by someone I'd considered a friend. But somehow I was the villain in this story. Jacob never said a word to defend me, never acknowledged that his behavior had started this whole mess. He just let me take all the blame while he continued his pathetic courtship of Diane. And she acted like nothing had happened, like she hadn't deliberately stolen the one good thing I had going at that job. I realized then that they'd probably been talking about me behind my back for weeks, painting me as some jealous, unstable woman who couldn't handle not being the center of attention. The meeting with Patterson was humiliating beyond belief. He listed off all these incidents I'd apparently been involved in: snippy comments during meetings, territorial behavior around certain projects, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere for new employees. Half of these things were complete news to me, or totally blown out of proportion. Like the time I'd corrected Diane's misunderstanding about our filing system. Apparently that was condescending and unwelcoming to new team members. Or when I'd pointed out that Jacob's suggestion was similar to something I'd proposed months earlier, that was attention-seeking and disruptive to team dynamics. It was clear that Jacob and Diane had been building a systematic case against me, collecting every minor interaction and spinning it to make me look like the problem employee. 3 months later, I found out Jacob and Diane were officially dating. Not through him telling me directly. I had to hear it from Jessica in HR, who mentioned seeing them at some restaurant downtown, looking very coupley. They'd been sneaking around for weeks, probably laughing about how clueless everyone was about their relationship. But the real kicker came when I got called into Patterson's office and was told my contract wouldn't be renewed. Performance issues and cultural fit concerns were the official reasons, but I knew exactly what had really happened. Jacob and Diane had positioned me as the problem employee, the bitter woman who couldn't handle normal workplace dynamics. Meanwhile, they got to play the mature, professional couple who rose above the drama and maintained their composure. I cleaned out my desk while Jacob pretended to be extremely busy at his computer, not even having the balls to look at me directly. Diane offered this fake sympathetic smile as I walked past with my box of personal belongings, like she was genuinely sorry things had worked out this way. The performance was absolutely sickening. 6 months later, I'm still unemployed because apparently word travels fast in our industry about difficult employees who can't maintain professional relationships. I see their engagement announcement on LinkedIn. Jacob looking happier than I'd ever seen him, Diane glowing with that smug satisfaction of a woman who got exactly what she wanted. Everyone acts like they're this perfect power couple, like their love story is so romantic and inspiring. Meanwhile, I'm the cautionary tale, the woman who couldn't handle seeing a coworker move on to bigger and better things. But here's what nobody wants to admit or acknowledge. I wasn't wrong about anything. Jacob was a coward who couldn't be honest about his feelings or intentions. Diane was a calculating bitch who knew exactly what she was doing from day one. She saw what Jacob and I had together and decided she wanted it for herself, then systematically destroyed me to get it. And I'm supposed to just smile and pretend like I don't see exactly what happened? Fuck that. They absolutely deserve each other. The thing that really gets me is how easily everyone bought their carefully constructed narrative. Suddenly I was the unstable one, the woman who couldn't handle professional relationships or normal workplace dynamics. But nobody questioned why Jacob's behavior changed so dramatically when Diane arrived. Nobody pointed out how convenient it was that all my performance issues started right around the time she began working there. Nobody wanted to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, I was reacting to being deliberately frozen out and replaced by someone else. I still check their social media sometimes, I'll admit it freely. They look disgustingly happy in their photos, all coupley and perfect with their matching workout gear and weekend hiking adventures. Jacob posts these thoughtful captions about finding love when you least expect it, and grateful for new beginnings that change everything. It makes me want to vomit, like our months of friendship meant absolutely nothing, like I was just some placeholder until something better came along to replace me. But here's the thing they don't know and will never understand. I remember everything about our relationship. Every conversation we had, every moment of genuine connection, every time Jacob told me things he probably never shared with anyone else in his life. I know about his insecurities regarding his career, his complicated family drama, his fears about not being successful enough to matter. And I know that what we had was real and meaningful, no matter how much he wants to pretend it wasn't significant. Diane can have him now, but she'll never have what we had together. She got the leftovers, the version of Jacob who learned to be guarded and careful about workplace relationships. I had the real him, even if it was only temporary and ultimately meaningless to him. Sometimes I wonder if they talk about me, if my name ever comes up in their perfect little relationship. Do they laugh about how pathetic I was, how obviously jealous and bitter? Or do they pretend I never existed, like our entire friendship was just some awkward phase Jacob went through before finding his true love? Either way, it doesn't matter anymore. They won, I lost, and life goes on whether I like it or not. But they'll never be able to erase the fact that for a while there, I mattered to him more than anyone else in that place. And that's something Diane will never have. no matter how many engagement rings he buys her or how many perfect couple photos they post online.